There's a lot of noise on the Delta variant, so it's sort of challenging to dig through. And so we really just focus on the data. Let's look at what we've dug into here on the Delta variant.
Yeah, we're taking much as we did when the pandemic started. We're taking lessons from around the world. Different countries are dealing with this differently, and Delta is just another chapter in that book. So this data comes from the Israel Ministry of Health. So Israel has very high vaccination rates. They're really good at tracking medical data. They have one of the most robust medical data systems in the world. And so, looking at this data on the Delta variant, and we're looking at how effective vaccines have been against preventing infection, preventing symptomatic infection, preventing hospitalization, and preventing death. And this is all versus the Delta variant, and this is all the Pfizer vaccine, which is regarded as one of the more effective vaccines available.
Okay.
And you look at this chart and you can take it a few ways if you focus on the second set of bars, symptomatic COVID-19. And what this is showing is folks who were vaccinated in January, the Pfizer vaccine is only 16% effective at preventing symptomatic COVID-19, which is very low, considering when the vaccine data came out last November, we were looking at 90+% effective rates at preventing transmission, nonetheless symptomatic COVID vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you see as we move out to folks that were vaccinated in February, March, April, the vaccine becomes more effective. But overall now, that purple bar in the second set of columns, 41% effective at preventing symptomatic infection from the Delta variant. So this data is consistent with what we've seen other places in the world, and factoring in that, the Delta variant has it's estimated at 1,000 times the viral load of prior variants. Mm-hmm. So it's really overwhelming the vaccine in some ways. So that's one piece of data. And this story, go to your point, if you don't trust in the vaccine, there's data here to support why. If you do trust in the vaccine, there's data here to support why.
Right. Yeah.
So it can just create a lot of misinformation. If you move out to the columns further on the right, though, you can see the Pfizer vaccine extremely effective at preventing hospitalization and death.
Right.
And not just the Pfizer vaccine, pretty much all vaccines, still extremely effective against the Delta variant in preventing hospitalization and death. And this is where the nuance comes in. So now you're telling me I've been fully vaccinated, there's a 41% chance
Could get it again. Right.
that I could get something like the flu.
Right.
Symptomatic COVID. I don't like that. Does that require lockdowns? Does that require mask mandates?
Mm-hmm.
Does that require vaccination mandates? But then you're also telling me it's almost impossible. It's a very low probability that I end up in the hospital or die if I've had the vaccine. Meaning, why would you lock down the economy? Lockdowns were a very blunt policy tool that had to be used in the absence of a vaccine to prevent overwhelming the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And you're basically telling me Delta is not going to overwhelm the healthcare system because if you're vaccinated,
the likelihood's low.
Yeah, you're not going to end up in the hospital or COVID-19. So these are all the factors. This is why this discussion is becoming so nuanced. This is why if you're worried about lockdowns, there's something here to support it. If you're worried about mask mandates, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so, take that as a primer and then go through what we've seen in the rest of the world.
So let me ask a question. So the government's reaction function to COVID has been solely based on case counts, right?
Yes.
So does this data change anything? Should they be looking at other ways to evaluate this?
Definitely. In the early days of the pandemic, you react to case counts because case counts result in hospitalizations and deaths. But what we've seen now is because the vaccine is effective at preventing hospitalizations and deaths, and because in many nations, like the US, for example, 90% of the 65 and older population has been vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And they represent the overwhelming share of hospitalizations and deaths historically. So what's happened is you've thrown in a wrench in the old reaction function. You've effectively broken the link. In the US, in the UK, in Israel, you can have rising case counts now related to Delta, but not rising or runaway hospitalizations or deaths Meaning, why would you need lockdowns? Lockdowns are to prevent the hospital system from being overwhelmed. So policymakers need to adapt their reaction function because, lockdowns in many ways seem unnecessary, and we know the economic impact of lockdowns.
And why do you think they're still focusing on mask mandates, lockdowns, things like that?
In abundance of caution, certainly. And then also have to realize that, yes, 90% of the U.S. population over age 65 has been vaccinated, but there are a number of areas in the country that have very low vaccination rates. So, you can't paint it all with a broad brush, but an abundance of caution, certainly, and it can take some time to adjust the reaction function. So.
And what about the idea of, we've been hearing a lot about booster shots for continued preventative care here.
Right.
What's the latest there?
Yeah, so going back to the data, you look at the second set of bars, and you can look at this and say, all right, well, clearly after 3 months, the vaccine is not very effective. I need a booster shot. But you have to think, what are the types of people that were getting the vaccine in January? Frontline healthcare workers, those with pre-existing conditions, and elderly. And that's true. If you're in one of those categories, because the viral load of Delta is so large, you probably are going to need a booster shot. That makes sense. If you're a frontline healthcare worker, you're getting 1,000 times the viral load thrown at you. You're not going to end up in the hospital or die from it, but you could get symptomatic COVID. So, if you are one of those cohorts of the population, would not at all be surprised if a booster shot would be required. If you're the type of person that got vaccinated in March or April, younger, no pre-existing conditions, etc., you have plenty of neutralizing antibodies. Seems unlikely. Israel has come out and said they do not see any reason why folks under the age of 65 with no pre-existing conditions would need a booster. So that's sort of where we're at with that now.
Great. So just to further dig into this data and some of the stuff you just mentioned, let's look at what's going on in the U.S.
Yeah, in the U.S., so we'll show this chart for a few countries. The dark blue line is deaths. The orange, or the green line, is hospitalizations. Those are all shown on the left axis. And then new cases are the light blue. And what you're seeing now, if we think about the old reaction function, cases are rising. Hospitalization should then rise with a lag, and then deaths follow with a lag. And so this is kind of make or break time. This is where we're testing to make sure that this idea of vaccinating the at-risk population works. If it works, then this light blue line should go up, but you shouldn't see a rise in hospitalizations or deaths.
Right.
So make or break time for the U.S. You have to look to other countries in the world that have similar vaccination rates, but have been dealing with Delta for longer, for clues as to how this is ultimately going to play out.
So let's look at India. They were pretty hard hit.
Yeah, in India. So this goes to show that we are very lucky that our vaccination rates are so high. There are a number of countries in the world that have vaccination rates in the single digits, are just now vaccinating frontline healthcare workers. I mean, India got absolutely hammered by the Delta variant, and still their vaccination rates are less than 10%. And so you can see just how transmissible the Delta variant is. Look at the peak in cases and deaths versus the prior peak in the fall. I mean, it is absolutely run away. It's to the point now where, some articles are being written, and there is some speculation that perhaps the Delta variant is so incredibly transmissible that without vaccines, it could run its entire course in a country in the span of 6 to 12 months, meaning approach natural herd immunity.
Right.
Don't know if that's true or not, but you can see just how rapidly the case counts are. So definitely not a great situation in India, but thankfully it looks like they're starting to come out on the other side of it.
Yeah. Same with the UK.
And now the UK, so the UK is another country that has been very fortunate and has vaccination rates similar to the US and has vaccinated approximately 90% of those 65 and older and frontline healthcare workers. So what you're seeing here is exactly what we're talking about with breaking the link, where case counts are rising, but not resulting in a commensurate surge in hospitalizations or deaths.
Right.
Meaning your reaction function has to change. They do not need to resort to lockdowns. They've been dealing with Delta variant for a long time now. And two things we've seen. One, economic growth has not been hampered at all. UK PMI readings have been averaging above 60 for the last 4 months. So blazing hot economic growth. Delta has not. And they have not had to resort to lockdowns in any shape or form. In fact, in mid-July, they lifted all COVID restrictions despite the Delta variant because they've effectively broken the link. So this is why, in our view, in countries like the US, and then you think, Europe isn't far behind in vaccinating the over 65 population. Even China in the next few months is going to approach 50% vaccinated. Once you get an overall vaccination rate of about 50%, that implies you vaccinated the overwhelming majority of those over 65. So a huge chunk of the world here, a huge chunk of global GDP is going to have broken the link. And Delta variant can rage on, but lockdowns will seem unnecessary.
But to counter that, China has started locking down again.
Yeah.
So what's the difference in their policy versus?
The difference is they have 300 cases and they lock down.
Yeah.
So they are still taking more of a zero COVID type approach, whereas we would declare victory if we had 300 cases, right, in the U.S. So totally different starting point of reference. But yeah, this goes to show, this chart shows that, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear about the Delta variant, but it most likely should not result in lockdowns.
However, talk to the viewers about living with COVID. Like, what is our thought on when this ends, when this quiets down? Will it ever quiet down?
Yeah, it's, if you think back to our outlook, our base case stuck at 87 miles per hour, one of the taglines in that outlook was, we will not declare definitive victory over COVID. I mean, as long as there are parts of the world that have low vaccination rates, this thing will mutate. It will evolve. We've seen that has been a constant throughout. We've seen mutations, and what's more likely is this becomes more endemic, like the flu. You have to go get your flu shot every year. It's mandated by your employer, by the government, whatever the case may be. They're all FDA approved, and this is just something we do that we live with for the rest of our lives. I mean, anybody who thought in March that we were going to defeat COVID, Delta's one example. You're going to learn to live with it. The health response is going to keep getting better. Science is going to keep getting better, and we're just going to be ahead of it. But we probably won't defeat it.
Do we get any data on the Lollapalooza crowd? Maybe that would be a good case study for.
If we were to sequence all the cases, we'd find some new variants.
400,000 people attended that weekend.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were not there.
I was not.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks to our research team for all these great slides. And as always, if you have questions, let us know, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thank you.